What if I told you that one of the most powerful compounds on the planet for fighting cancer and inflammation is not in a pharmacy, but in your kitchen cabinet? And what if I told you that specifically for older adults, drinking just 1 cup of a very specific tea every night before bed can trigger a chain reaction in your body that works while you sleep, silently dismantling cancerous cells, reducing chronic inflammation, and essentially giving your immune system a complete reset? I know that sounds almost too good to be true. But stay with me, because today I'm going to explain the science behind it, the studies, the biology, the cellular mechanics. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it works and exactly what you need to do tonight. My name is Dr. William Lee, and if you are new here, welcome. This channel is dedicated to providing real, scientifically grounded health information. The kind of information that used to exist only in medical journals and conference rooms. So let's get into it, because what I'm about to share with you may genuinely change the trajectory of your health. First, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why chronic diseases increase so dramatically after the age of 60? Why people who were perfectly healthy in their 40s and 50s suddenly find themselves dealing with arthritis, fatigue, diabetes, heart disease, or even cancer in their 60s and 70s? It is not simply bad luck. It is biology, and the primary villain in that story has a name. It is called chronic low-grade inflammation. This is a term coined by researchers combining the words inflammation and aging, and it describes a very specific phenomenon that occurs in every human body as we get older. As we age, our immune system begins to lose its precision. Instead of launching a targeted attack against real threats, it begins firing low-intensity inflammatory signals almost constantly, even when there is nothing to fight. And that background noise of inflammation, that slow, silent burn occurring in your tissues, your blood vessels, your organs, is now recognized by the National Institute on Aging and by researchers at Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and the Mayo Clinic as the single most important underlying driver of nearly every major chronic disease of aging. Cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, osteoarthritis, and cancer, not as a side effect of these diseases, as a precondition for them, as the biological environment in which they are born and in which they thrive. A landmark review published in Nature Medicine that synthesized data from over 200 independent studies concluded that chronic low-grade inflammation was present as a measurable biological feature in virtually all adults over 65 with chronic disease, and that the magnitude of that inflammatory burden was directly predictive of disease severity, disease progression, and mortality. The researchers described it as a smoldering fire that never goes out and that eventually burns down the house. Now here's the question that should follow from that understanding. If chronic inflammation is the common biological root of so many of the diseases that kill and disable older adults, what is the most direct and evidence-based way to extinguish it? And this is where I need to introduce you to a compound that I consider one of the most remarkable and most underappreciated substances in all of nutritional medicine. It is called EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, and it is the primary bioactive polyphenol found in green tea, and in extraordinary concentrations in a specific form of green tea that I'm going to tell you about in detail today. EGCG is a catechin, a type of plant polyphenol that belongs to the flavonoid family, and its biological activity in the human body at the cellular and molecular level has been studied in hundreds of peer-reviewed studies over the past 3 decades. What those studies reveal is a compound with a range of protective mechanisms that is genuinely extraordinary. Let me walk you through the most clinically significant ones, because understanding what EGCG does inside your cells is what makes the nightly tea practice I'm going to describe not a wellness trend, but a scientifically grounded therapeutic habit. The first and most foundational mechanism is EGCG's effect on the NF-κB pathway. NF-κB, nuclear factor kappa B, is the master transcription factor that controls the expression of the genes responsible for producing the inflammatory cytokines that drive chronic inflammation. It is essentially the on switch for the inflammatory response at the cellular level. In a healthy young immune system, NF-κB is activated when there is a real threat, does its work, and is then shut down by regulatory mechanisms. In the aging immune system, NF-κB becomes constitutively active, meaning it stays turned on chronically, producing a continuous low-level stream of inflammatory signals even in the absence of any genuine threat. This is the molecular basis of the inflammaging process I described. EGCG is one of the most potent natural inhibitors of NF-κB activity that has been identified in the scientific literature. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences demonstrated that EGCG directly inhibits the IKK complex, the kinase that activates NF-κB, and that this inhibition produced measurable reductions in the downstream inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, TNF-alpha and IL-1 beta in human cell cultures, and critically, subsequent clinical studies demonstrated that this effect translates from the lab to the living human body. A randomized controlled trial published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that adults over 60 who consumed green tea extract containing standardized EGCG daily for 12 weeks showed significant reductions in serum IL-6 and CRP, C-reactive protein, two of the most reliable biomarkers of systemic inflammation, compared to the placebo group. This was not a small or marginal effect. The reductions were clinically meaningful, comparable in magnitude to those seen with low-dose anti-inflammatory medications, but without the gastrointestinal side effects and organ stress that those medications carry. The second mechanism is even more directly relevant to cancer, and it is the one that I find most remarkable as a researcher who has spent decades studying angiogenesis, the process by which tumors build new blood vessels to fuel their growth. EGCG is one of the most potent natural anti-angiogenic compounds identified in scientific research. It inhibits the activity of VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, and its receptor signaling pathway, which is the primary molecular mechanism by which tumors recruit new blood vessel growth. Without an adequate blood supply, solid tumors cannot grow beyond a few millimeters in diameter. They remain dormant, contained, unable to expand or metastasize. EGCG essentially cuts off the tumor's ability to build its own supply lines. I have published research on angiogenesis inhibition as a cancer prevention strategy, and the evidence on EGCG as a natural angiogenesis modulator is among the most compelling in the field. A study published in Cancer Research found that EGCG inhibited VEGF-induced endothelial cell proliferation and tube formation, the precursors of new blood vessel growth, at concentrations achievable through regular tea consumption. And in animal models of cancer, green tea polyphenols consistently suppress tumor growth and metastasis through this anti-angiogenic mechanism. But EGCG's anti-cancer activity goes beyond angiogenesis inhibition. It operates on multiple additional cancer-relevant pathways simultaneously. It activates the tumor suppressor protein p53, which acts as the genome's guardian, identifying DNA damage and triggering repair, or, when damage is irreparable, triggering apoptosis, the programmed self-destruction of the damaged cell before it can become cancerous. It inhibits the PI3K-ACT-mTOR signaling cascade, one of the most frequently dysregulated pathways in human cancers, which normally promotes cell survival and proliferation, and whose overactivation is a hallmark of many cancer types. And it activates the NRF2 pathway, the master regulator of the cellular antioxidant defense system, which increases the production of the body's own internal antioxidant enzymes, particularly glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase, that neutralize the reactive oxygen species which damage DNA and create the mutational landscape in which cancer develops. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Cancer that pooled data from 51 epidemiological studies and over 1.6 million participants found that regular green tea consumption was associated with a statistically significant reduction in the risk of multiple cancer types, including breast cancer, colorectal cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, and gastric cancer. The association was dose-dependent, meaning higher consumption was associated with greater risk reduction and was strongest in studies that specifically measured serum EGCG levels rather than just self-reported tea intake. Now let me tell you about the specific form of green tea that I want you to start drinking tonight, because not all green tea is equal, and the difference between the form with the most clinical evidence and a standard green tea bag from a grocery store is substantial. The tea I am recommending is matcha, and I want to explain precisely why matcha represents a categorically different level of EGCG concentration and bioavailability compared to conventional green tea. Matcha is made from shade-grown green tea leaves that are harvested, dried, and stone-ground into a fine powder. The shade-growing process, where the tea plants are covered for 3 to 4 weeks before harvest to deprive them of direct sunlight, causes the plant to dramatically increase its chlorophyll and L-theanine content, and more importantly for our purposes, to concentrate its catechin polyphenols, including EGCG, in the leaves as a stress response. The result is a leaf with a significantly higher polyphenol content than conventionally grown tea leaves. But the more important distinction is this. When you brew conventional green tea, you steep the leaves in water and then discard them, extracting perhaps 20 to 30% of the available polyphenols into the liquid, while leaving the majority in the discarded leaves. When you prepare and drink matcha, you are consuming the entire ground leaf suspended in water. You are ingesting 100% of the available EGCG and polyphenols, not just the fraction that diffuses into the water during steeping. A study published in the Journal of Chromatography found that matcha contained EGCG concentrations approximately 137 times higher than the most commonly available conventional green tea. 1 cup of matcha from a quality source prepared correctly provides a dose of EGCG that would require drinking many cups of conventional green tea to approximate. And there is another compound in matcha that deserves specific attention, particularly for older adults, and that is L-theanine. L-theanine is a unique amino acid found almost exclusively in tea plants, and it has a set of neurological and physiological effects that are directly relevant to the evening, pre-sleep timing I am recommending. L-theanine crosses the blood-brain barrier and produces a state of calm alertness by increasing alpha wave activity in the brain, similar to the state achieved during meditation, without sedation or drowsiness. It modulates GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, and serotonin activity, producing an anxiolytic effect that reduces the cortisol-driven nervous system activation that keeps many older adults in a state of chronic low-grade stress, and it has been shown to improve the depth and quality of sleep without altering sleep architecture, meaning it helps you sleep more deeply without suppressing the REM and slow-wave sleep stages that are essential for immune function and cellular repair. A randomized study published in Nutrients found that L-theanine supplementation in adults over 60 produced significant improvements in sleep quality scores, reduced time to fall asleep, reduced nighttime awakening, and reduced morning fatigue compared to placebo. And here's what makes the combination in matcha so elegant. The L-theanine is providing the nervous system calm and sleep quality enhancement, while the EGCG is initiating the anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer cellular processes that continue to operate throughout the night while you sleep. The tea is doing 2 jobs simultaneously. One you feel immediately in the form of calm relaxation. One you cannot feel but that the biology confirms is happening at the cellular level. Now I need to address the question of timing, because why specifically at night, before sleep, rather than in the morning or throughout the day? And there are several converging reasons why the pre-sleep timing is not arbitrary, but is actually the most strategically optimal time for this specific intervention. The first reason relates to the biology of cellular repair and autophagy during sleep. Autophagy is the cellular self-cleaning process by which cells identify and break down damaged organelles, misfolded proteins, and dysfunctional cellular components, essentially taking out their own garbage and recycling the components. It is one of the most important mechanisms by which the body eliminates precancerous cellular abnormalities before they can progress. Autophagy is significantly upregulated during sleep, and specifically during the periods of metabolic fasting that occur when you are not eating during the night. EGCG has been shown in research published in Cell Death and Disease to activate and enhance autophagy through the AMPK pathway, the cellular energy sensor that is one of the primary triggers for autophagic activity. Consuming EGCG in the hours before sleep means it reaches peak tissue concentration precisely during the period when the body's own autophagy is at its highest activity, potentially creating a synergistic amplification of the cellular cleanup process. The second reason is related to the circadian biology of the immune system. The immune system's activity is not constant throughout the day. It follows a circadian rhythm with certain immune functions, particularly those involving the adaptive immune response and inflammatory regulation, showing peak activity during the nighttime hours. Natural killer cells, the immune cells most directly responsible for identifying and destroying cancer cells and virally infected cells, show their highest activity levels during the late night and early morning hours. Delivering the immune-modulating and inflammatory regulatory activity of EGCG during this window of peak immune activity may represent a more effective timing strategy than morning or midday consumption. The third reason is practical and relates to the caffeine content of matcha. Matcha does contain caffeine, approximately 35 to 70 milligrams per cup depending on the grade and preparation method. This is less than coffee, but enough to be relevant for sleep if consumed too close to bedtime or if you are caffeine sensitive. The recommendation I give my patients is to consume the matcha approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours before your intended sleep time. This timing allows the caffeine to be largely metabolized while the L-theanine and EGCG remain at active concentrations in the bloodstream. Some patients who are highly caffeine sensitive prefer a ceremonial grade matcha with a smaller preparation, approximately half a teaspoon of powder rather than the standard 1 teaspoon, which reduces the caffeine dose while preserving the majority of the EGCG and L-theanine content. Now let me address something that I believe is essential for the integrity of this conversation, because I want to be completely honest with you about what the science does and does not show. The evidence for EGCG's anti-inflammatory effects in humans is strong, replicated, and published in rigorous peer-reviewed journals. The evidence for its anti-cancer mechanisms at the cellular level is also extensive and compelling. The epidemiological evidence associating green tea consumption with reduced cancer risk is consistent across populations and dose-dependent. What the evidence does not yet include is a large-scale randomized controlled trial in humans that definitively proves that drinking matcha prevents cancer in people who have not yet been diagnosed. That level of trial is extraordinarily expensive, takes decades to run, and requires thousands of participants. It has not been done, and I would be misleading you if I claimed otherwise. What the evidence does support, clearly and compellingly, is this. EGCG from matcha engages multiple biological mechanisms that are directly anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer at the cellular and molecular level. Populations with high green tea consumption show lower rates of the cancers that EGCG has the most direct mechanistic evidence against. The bioavailability and safety profile of matcha at normal consumption levels is excellent, and the additional benefits for sleep quality, cognitive function, cardiovascular health, and metabolic regulation are independently documented. As a clinician and researcher, I consider the evidence more than sufficient to justify making a nightly cup of high-quality matcha a standard recommendation for adults over 60. The risk is negligible. The potential benefit, based on the totality of the evidence, is substantial. Now let me walk you through exactly how to prepare your evening matcha to maximize its therapeutic potential, because preparation matters more than most people realize. You will need ceremonial grade or high-quality culinary grade matcha powder. The grade matters because lower grade matcha, the kind used in commercial baked goods and beverages, comes from older tea leaves with significantly lower EGCG concentrations and a more bitter, astringent taste. Ceremonial grade matcha comes from the youngest, most carefully shaded leaves and has the highest concentration of the active compounds we are interested in. You do not need the most expensive option on the market, but you should avoid the cheapest bulk options that do not specify grade or origin. Measure approximately 1 teaspoon of matcha powder, or half a teaspoon if you are caffeine sensitive, into a small bowl or directly into your cup. Add a small amount of warm water, between 70 and 80 degrees Celsius, not boiling. Boiling water degrades the EGCG and L-theanine and produces a more bitter taste. Whisk the matcha with the water using a bamboo whisk or a small electric frother until it is completely dissolved and slightly frothy. Then add the remaining warm water to fill your cup. You can add a small amount of unsweetened plant-based milk if you prefer a creamier texture. Do not add sugar or honey because the glucose spike will partially undermine the anti-inflammatory benefit you are creating with the EGCG. If you need a touch of sweetness, a very small amount of pure stevia is the only sweetener I would consider compatible with the therapeutic intent of this drink. There is one additional ingredient I want to suggest that significantly enhances the bioavailability of EGCG, and that has its own independent body of evidence for anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory activity. Add a small squeeze of fresh lemon juice to your matcha. The vitamin C and organic acids in lemon juice stabilize the catechins and protect them from degradation in the digestive tract, significantly increasing the proportion of EGCG that reaches systemic circulation. A study published in Molecular Nutrition and Food Research found that adding citrus juice to green tea increased the bioavailability of catechins by up to 5 times compared to green tea without the acidification. 5 times. From 1 squeeze of lemon. This is one of the simplest and most impactful preparation modifications you can make. Now, beyond the matcha itself, I want to spend some time on what I call the synergistic stack, the other evening habits that, when combined with the matcha practice, create a compound effect on inflammation reduction and immune optimization that is significantly greater than any single intervention alone. The first synergistic addition is a consistent eating cutoff in the evening. The research on time-restricted eating and its effects on inflammatory markers, autophagy, and cancer risk is among the most exciting areas of metabolic medicine. When you stop eating at a consistent time in the evening and allow a fasting window of at least 12 hours before your first meal the next morning, you amplify the autophagy that the EGCG is also stimulating. You reduce the overnight metabolic burden on the liver and digestive system. And you allow insulin levels to fall to their lowest point during the night, which is critical because chronic insulin elevation is one of the direct promoters of the inflammatory cascade. I recommend finishing your last food intake of the day at least 3 hours before your intended sleep time and drinking your matcha within that window as your final intake before the overnight fast begins. The second synergistic addition is 5 to 10 minutes of slow, deep breathing immediately after your matcha. I have recommended this in several of my previous videos on cardiovascular health, and I want to repeat it here in the context of inflammation because the anti-inflammatory mechanism of parasympathetic activation through slow breathing is direct and well documented. When you take slow, deep diaphragmatic breaths, with exhalations approximately twice as long as inhalations, you activate the vagus nerve, the primary communication highway of the parasympathetic nervous system. Vagal activation reduces cortisol, suppresses the sympathetic nervous system, and directly inhibits the NF-κB pathway that drives the production of inflammatory cytokines. The same pathway that EGCG is inhibiting pharmacologically, slow breathing inhibits neurologically. The two mechanisms are complementary and additive. 5 minutes of slow breathing while your matcha's EGCG is being absorbed into the bloodstream creates a convergence of anti-inflammatory signals that is greater than either alone. The third synergistic addition is ensuring adequate darkness and sleep environment quality, because the cellular repair processes that the EGCG and the fasting window are supporting are almost entirely dependent on the quality and depth of the sleep that follows. I have covered this in my video on morning cardiac risk, and the principles are the same here. A cool bedroom between 17 and 20 degrees Celsius. Complete darkness, because any light exposure during the night suppresses melatonin, which is not only a sleep hormone, but is itself a potent direct antioxidant and immune modulator with documented anti-cancer activity. And screen elimination for at least the last 30 minutes before sleep, because the blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production and keeps the sympathetic nervous system activated at precisely the time when the transition to parasympathetic dominance that allows deep sleep and cellular repair needs to begin. I also want to address a common question I receive about whether other teas provide similar benefits. Chamomile, valerian, passion flower, and other herbal teas have genuine evidence for sleep quality improvement and modest anti-anxiety effects through GABA modulation. They are beneficial additions to an evening routine, and I do not discourage them. But they do not contain EGCG, and the specific cancer preventive and anti-inflammatory mechanisms I have described today are specific to the catechin polyphenols found in green tea and at their highest concentration in matcha. If you want to add chamomile or another herbal tea to your evening in addition to matcha, that is perfectly compatible, but they are not substitutes for the specific biological activity of EGCG. I also want to address the question of supplements versus the whole food tea. Concentrated green tea extract supplements that provide standardized EGCG doses do exist and do have their own body of research. However, I consistently recommend the whole tea preparation over isolated supplements for several reasons. The matcha preparation delivers not just EGCG, but the entire polyphenol matrix of the tea leaf, including other catechins, L-theanine, chlorophyll, and trace minerals, which work synergistically and whose combined effect appears to exceed the effect of isolated EGCG alone. Additionally, there have been rare cases of liver toxicity reported with very high-dose concentrated green tea extract supplements, particularly when taken on an empty stomach, which do not occur with normal tea consumption. The whole tea is safer, arguably more effective, and more sustainable as a long-term daily practice. I want to close by putting this nightly practice in the context of the broader picture of what it means to age with intention and with biological knowledge. The aging body is not simply breaking down randomly. It is responding, systematically and predictably, to the inputs it receives and to the biological environment that those inputs create. Chronic inflammation is not an inevitable consequence of aging. It is a consequence of the combination of aging with a pro-inflammatory diet, a pro-inflammatory stress state, a pro-inflammatory sleep environment, and a deficit of the plant-derived compounds that evolution has equipped the human body to use for its own defense. When you sit down every evening 90 minutes before sleep and prepare and drink your matcha, you are doing something that is far more significant than drinking a pleasant warm beverage. You are delivering a concentration of one of the most potent natural anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer compounds identified in modern science, at the precise biological window when the body's own repair and immune surveillance mechanisms are preparing to become most active. You are creating a daily habit that compounds over weeks, months, and years into a biological environment that is measurably less hospitable to inflammation, to oxidative damage, and to the cellular conditions that precede cancer. You are giving your immune system the tools it was designed to use, tools that modern diets have largely removed, in a form that is inexpensive, accessible, pleasant, and profoundly backed by evidence. That is not a small thing. In a world where cancer prevention is often discussed only in the context of screenings and genetic risk factors, the idea that a daily cup of tea prepared with knowledge and intention can shift the biological terrain of your body in a direction that reduces cancer risk and extends healthy longevity is one of the most empowering pieces of information I can share. I'm Dr. William Lee. If this video gave you something valuable tonight, please share it with someone you care about who is over 60. Subscribe to this channel for more evidence-based health information, and leave me a comment below. I want to know, are you going to start your nightly matcha practice tonight? And if you already drink green tea, has this changed how you think about what you are drinking and why? Your body is working for you right now. Give it what it needs to keep doing that job. Tonight, every night, 1 cup at a time.